Have you ever found yourself taking care of someone for years, giving your all, and in the end, being forgotten, ignored, even betrayed? Well, that's my story. A story that might also be the story of many women like us who dedicated their whole lives to a family that turned their backs when illness and old age arrived. When the man I loved for 50 years got sick, I uncovered secrets I never imagined and a loneliness that hurts more than just being alone. Today, I want to share this story with you, not to seek pity, but to show that even in the face of emotional abandonment and family betrayal, we can find strength and dignity to start over. Stay with me until the end. I promise every word will be worth it. And while you listen, tell me in the comments, what city are you listening from? I want to feel that connection from woman to woman. Oh, and if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, take a moment to subscribe now, because here we share real stories that touch the heart and bring life lessons we can carry with us.
I met Alexander at a church fair, back when I still wore handmade dresses and believed life was all about getting married, having children, and being happy. He was the most handsome guy in the parish, and he had that calm way about him, someone who listened more than he spoke. He asked me to be his girlfriend with a bouquet of flowers from his mother's garden. From that moment on, it was 50 years. 50! That's no small thing. 2 children, 3 moves, financial crises, and a whole life carried through time together. We didn't fight much, and when we did, it wasn't the yelling kind. I'd put on my apron, he'd grab the newspaper, and we'd sit in silence, but we still fell asleep holding hands. I got house for the kids, and now I spend my days in that cold hospital, sitting beside him, holding the hand that used to squeeze mine with strength and now only trembles. At 72, I should be spending my time with my grandchildren, but instead I'm here, surrounded by machines, the smell of alcohol, and the constant beeping of monitors. He doesn't talk much, but he looks at me like he's afraid. Sometimes he naps and murmurs names I don't recognize. Other times he asks for forgiveness without explaining why. I don't ask. I don't want to know. Not now. I'd rather believe it's just fear of death that tightens his chest. But is it really? Because there's something in the air, a scent of secrets, a feeling that I'm sitting beside a stranger, the same man I cared for my entire life. Or did I never really know him at all?
Now that everything is so quiet, I find myself remembering things I chose to ignore at the time. There were those sudden work trips. He said they were meetings, but he never brought back a receipt, an invoice, nothing. Just a new shirt in his suitcase or a different cologne. And the phone calls, always late at night. He'd say it was a wrong number and hang up quickly. I saw the change in his eyes, but I kept silent. I preferred to believe in the story I had built rather than face the doubt. I was one of those women who believed that love meant trusting until the end. And I did trust him, even when he hid his phone, or when he'd get irritated by simple questions like, "Where were you?" I told myself, he's just tired, he's overwhelmed. I kept patching up the holes with understanding, stitching the silence with affection. But now, here with him so fragile, all those questions come back, and they hurt more now than they did back then. There comes a moment when you realize that silent suffering is also a choice, and I chose not to suffer before. I chose to care, to make fresh coffee, to make the bed, to wait for Sundays with beans on the stove and the kids visiting. Should I have asked more? Put my foot down? Listen more to my woman's intuition? Sometimes the heart gives us warnings, but we love so much that we cover our ears.
Ever since their father got sick, the boys changed. They always seemed to be in a rush, always on their phones, always avoiding my eyes. One of them, the younger one, would arrive at the hospital, give his father a quick kiss on the forehead, and already look restless, like the air was too heavy. The other barely spoke, spending more time in the hallway than in the room. That started to hurt me more than seeing Alexander so fragile. Because when your children pull away, the loneliness runs deeper. I asked, "Are you guys okay?" And they'd just say, "Yeah, Mom, we're just tired." But it was more than tiredness. There was a strange silence between them. Glances exchanged, short answers, as if they were carrying a secret bigger than the pain of the illness. One of them even avoided saying his father's name. He just called him, like he was talking about a stranger, not the man who raised him. And I started to realize that maybe I wasn't the only one deceived in this story. During visiting hours, I noticed they only stayed when I was there. When I'd go get a coffee or stretch my legs, they'd disappear and come back with different eyes, heavy eyes. Once, I caught the older one crying in the hospital bathroom. He said it was because of his father, but that tear was something else. A mix of resentment and shame. Resentment from someone who knew too much, and shame for not having said something sooner. But what could be so serious that it silenced two sons?
It was late afternoon, the sun hiding behind the hospital curtain, when the room door slowly opened. I was sitting beside Alexander, holding his hand like I did every day. A well-dressed woman walked in, gray hair with perfectly done highlights, a leather purse on her arm, and right behind her, a young woman in her early 20s who had something familiar about her. The way she walked, the shape of her eyes. They both stopped in front of the bed. And then the young woman spoke. "Dad?" That word cut through the air like a knife. I froze. I looked at them, then at Alexander. He opened his eyes and started to cry. The older woman held his arm and said, "We came. We couldn't keep it hidden anymore." I stood up slowly, confused. The young woman was crying, clearly lost, and I could only hear that word
echoing in my head. "Dad? What do you mean, Dad? Of that girl? And that woman, who was she?" That was the moment when my world began to collapse from the inside. Alexander tried to sit up, mumbled something, but then groaned in pain. The machine beside him beeped loudly. The nurses rushed in. They told us to leave. Me, the woman, the young girl, all of us were pushed into the hallway. But it wasn't the hospital air suffocating me anymore. It was the emptiness left inside me by that single word, and the certainty that I never truly knew the truth.
The hospital hallway felt like it had shrunk. The sound of the machines, the hurried footsteps of the nurses, everything became a distant hum. I looked at that woman and the young girl, trying to understand how any of this could be real. Time passed slowly until one of the nurses came and said he was stable but couldn't have visitors for now. That's when I decided to go in. I needed to look into his eyes, to know, even if only through silence, what was happening. I walked in slowly. The two of them followed me without a word from me. Alexander had his eyes open. He looked weak, but conscious. When he saw me, he tried to smile. I stepped closer and said, "Who are they, Alexander?" He was silent for a few seconds. Then he looked at the woman, then at me, and whispered, I, and that was it. His breathing faltered, his body tensed up, and he clutched his chest. A sound of pain tore through the room. The medical team rushed in within seconds. They pushed us out. The three of us, me, her, and the young woman, stood outside, frozen. There were no screams, no tears, just a heavy silence that spoke more than any explanation ever could. For the first time, that woman and I truly looked at each other, and there, deep in her eyes, I saw a pain that felt just like mine. But how can two pains like that fit into the same story? And why did they only come now?
We stood there, side by side in the hallway, not knowing where to look. None of us said a word, but our eyes spoke loudly. The woman, who I would later learn was named Laura, looked at me with a mix of guilt and sorrow, like someone asking for forgiveness without words. The younger woman paced back and forth, anxious, until she stopped right in front of me and in a quiet voice asked, "Are you my father's wife?" I took a moment to answer. I don't know if it was the shock, the hurt, or the lump in my throat. I just nodded. She lowered her eyes. "He was my father, and he never told me he had another family." The girl was crying, and in that moment I realized that standing there wasn't a rival, nor someone to blame. There was a daughter, a girl with a broken heart, just like mine. And Laura, silent, held her purse tightly against her chest, as if trying to protect what was left of her own dignity. The nurse returned and said he was under observation. No one could go in yet. We all sat on the same hard bench in the hallway, me at one end, Laura at the other, and Camilla, now I knew her name, in the middle. It was as if that bench held three different stories that had collided at a single point. And it was right then that I understood emotional abandonment doesn't always have just one face. Sometimes it comes disguised as silence,
absence, a double life, and other times as love given only halfway. It didn't take long before the doctor appeared in the hallway. His face said everything before the words even came out. "I'm sorry, Mr. Alexander didn't make it. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't ask anything. I just felt a hollow emptiness take over my body, like not just a part of me had been ripped away, but also my story, my certainties, my memories, everything." The news hit like a stone dropped into a still lake, and the ripples wouldn't stop spreading. Laura put her hand over her mouth and closed her eyes. Camila collapsed into her lap. I stood, frozen. The pain was so immense it couldn't fit into a tear. There was only silence, a silence that screamed all the time I had lost by trusting too much. And in that moment, the three of us, so different, so hurt, stood there, side by side, facing the same ending. An ending that was also a beginning of unanswered questions, of tangled feelings, and of a new reality that none of us had chosen. The doctor walked away. A nurse came over to ask about arrangements, but no one responded. We just stayed there, the three of us, not knowing who was supposed to do what. Who was the official widow? Who had the right to decide? Who deserved what? No one argued, no one pointed fingers, because sometimes family betrayal doesn't destroy with shouting, it destroys with the confusion it leaves behind. And what do you do when the life you built over 50 years ends with a question that has no answer?
The funeral was scheduled for the next morning in a small chapel where we had already held services for other family members. But this time, it felt like time itself had changed. The atmosphere was heavy, dense. My sons arrived quietly, heads down. When they saw Laura and Camila sitting in the front row, they froze. No one said a word, no arguments, no drama, but the discomfort filled the room like a thick, stormy cloud. I sat in a corner, without flowers in my hands, without the strength to receive condolences. Some people came over and whispered, others just watched from a distance, curious. A distant uncle asked, "Who's that over there?" I just lowered my head. There was no easy explanation to give. The presence of Laura and Camila with red eyes and trembling hands was like a broken mirror in front of my family, and the shards were scattered everywhere. Death doesn't erase abandonment, it exposes it. My sons avoided getting close to them, but I was watching. They knew. Maybe not everything, but they knew something. And what hurt the most was realizing that the rejection I had always feared from them in old age was already there, disguised as omission. Shame seemed stronger than compassion. And I, sitting there in my black dress, with my heart in pieces, began to understand that the pain didn't come only from Alexander's betrayal. It came from the silence of those I loved the most. After the funeral, the house returned to its usual silence, heavy silence, the kind you can feel in the air, in the smell of coffee cooling in the cup. It was then that one of my sons came to me with a yellowed letter, carefully folded. "Mom,
I think your father wanted you to read this." His hand trembled a little, maybe from guilt, maybe from fear. I opened the letter with shaky fingers, and Alexandre's words cut me like an invisible dagger. He confessed everything. He spoke of the second family he kept for 30 years, of divided love, of the cowardice and not telling anyone. He asked for forgiveness with a raw sincerity that seemed torn from the depths of his heart, but also brought an explanation that didn't erase the pain. He said he never knew how to reconcile the two worlds, and that he lived in fear of losing both women he loved. That testimony was like a blow, a mixture of relief in knowing the truth and suffering for everything that was lost. Reading those lines, I realized the emotional abandonment wasn't just mine. It was also that of the women he loved in secret, those who couldn't be seen, touched, or even remembered in public. And I, who cared for him like a mother cares for her son, now felt like a woman abandoned in silence, in a testament that felt more like a cry for help. Would forgiveness be possible, or did that paper seal the end of our story forever?
The days of silence felt endless. I avoided looking at the phone, but I knew sooner or later I would have to call Laura. It was she who took the initiative, confessing that she wanted to talk, to understand, perhaps to find some peace amid the chaos. We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe in town where the noise of machines and the hospital smell were far away. I arrived with a heavy heart, mixing fear and painful curiosity. When I saw her, I didn't immediately recognize the enemy my mind had created. Laura was a simple woman, but her eyes were full of hurt and hope. We started talking slowly, between tears and silences, sharing what each of us knew, what we had lived through. She spoke of Camila, the girl who grew up believing a lie, carrying the burden of such a heavy secret. I told her about the years caring for Alexander, sleepless nights, and the emotional abandonment that consumed me. The conversation was difficult, but also freeing. I realized that despite our differences, we both were victims of the same betrayal. And maybe in that unexpected meeting, something none of us imagined could be born. An understanding, a truce, a new way to live with the pain. But there was still so much left to reveal, so many questions in the air, and the fear that everything might collapse all over again. During our meeting, Laura told me about the years she lived believing Alexander was a widower, a lone man full of stories she clung to with hope. He invented a parallel life, full of lies I couldn't even imagine. Camilla, the youngest daughter, grew up not knowing who her real father was. A secret so heavy she only discovered it when Alexander's illness brought us together in an unexpected way. It was as if two completely separate lives had been written from the same twisted script. We, the women, deceived, betrayed, not only by the man we loved, but also by the silence of the children who kept pieces of that story. Laura said she felt a mix of anger and pity for him, like someone who loves and hates at the same time. I understood, because that's exactly how I felt, a deep pain mixed with the desire to forgive, to find some peace. By the end of that day,
I realized our pain had something in common: true abandonment, the kind that eats away from the inside, destroying dignity in old age. And even though betrayal feels like a final blow, it can also be the beginning of a new way to understand love. Not the kind that deceives, but the kind that heals, even when comes late. I returned home with my head full of thoughts, my heart tight but somehow lighter. I entered the room where he used to be, now empty, silent, with his scent still lingering on the walls. I sat on the chair beside the bed, looked in the wardrobe mirror, and faced myself. It was the first time in a long while that I didn't see the woman trapped in illusion, but someone ready to start over. The truth, as harsh as it was, set me free. I realized I had spent so many years caring for a man who was never solely mine, that I carried a burden that wasn't just mine. And right there, in that moment, I felt the emptiness fill with something unexpected. The freedom to be who I am, to seek what truly matters. The pain of emotional abandonment still hurt, of course, but the feeling of being forgotten in the hospital, of being betrayed, began to lose its power. Life showed me at 72 years old that dignity in old age isn't just about caring for the body, but also the soul. That family abandonment can be faced head-on. That loneliness in old age doesn't have to be a punishment, and that even in silence it's possible to find strength to move forward. And I wonder, will this freedom I felt last? Or will the shadow of betrayal be ready to surround me again? I called the boys for a talk I had been putting off for a long time, but knew was necessary. I sat with them in the living room in a heavy silence, where every word felt as heavy as a stone. I spoke about betrayal, forgiveness, and mostly about how I knew they also carried secrets. I saw tears well up, heard choked apologies, and felt a relief mixed with pain. They confessed that in some way they already knew about the existence of the other family, but were afraid of what it could do to me and our relationship. That silence, as heavy as their father's illness, was an open wound that was finally starting to heal. Between trembling words and tight hugs, we began to rebuild bridges that time and abandonment tried to tear down. It was a difficult moment, but also a new beginning. I understood that despite mistakes and omissions, there was love among us and a shared desire to move forward. After all, dignity in old age also involves this: accepting that life is made of meetings and partings, and that family, despite everything, can still be a safe haven.
After the conversation with my sons, I felt it was time to take another step, even without really knowing where it would lead us. I invited Laura and Camilla to lunch at my house, a simple gesture, but full of meaning. I wanted to show that despite everything, there was a place for them there. When they arrived, the atmosphere was tense, words hesitant, but there was something in the air that made me believe this meeting could be the start of something new. We sat at the table with simple dishes and fresh coffee and gradually shared stories. Laura spoke of her childhood, of the absences she felt. Camilla, shy, shared memories of a girl who grew up unaware of the truth, but full of dreams and questions. I told a bit about my pain, the silent abandonment, and the love that never died, despite everything. Between shy laughs and held back tears, I realized we were building a bridge. Maybe not a family one, but one of respect and understanding. That lunch didn't erase the hurts, nor did it create perfect bonds, but it was a step. A step that taught me dignity in old age is also about having the courage to start over, to open the door to the unexpected, and to accept that love can transform, not into what we dreamed, but into what life allowed. And I wonder, how many other unexpected lunches could still come from this meeting?
Reaching 72 years old with a secret this big revealed was like receiving a shock no one expects, but deep down it needed to happen. I learned that love is not just a pretty promise or a silent agreement, but truth, the kind we sometimes don't want to hear, but that sets us free. I discovered that the pain of family and emotional abandonment, even when silent, can be transformed into strength to start over. I understood that no matter how much loneliness in old age feels like a punishment, it can also be an invitation to look within, to find the dignity no one can take away. That life is made of meetings, losses, betrayals, but also forgiveness and rebuilding, and that it's never too late to rewrite your own story, even when your heart is tired and your soul marked. Today, I look back and give thanks, even with the suffering, because that truth set me free. It gave me the courage to live for myself, to accept my scars, and to make room for a new beginning, a life where the past no longer holds me and where I can finally find peace. But the question that still echoes in my chest is, do we really learn, or do we just get used to living with the wounds? After all I've been through, I've learned that carrying the truth, no matter how painful, is the first step to finding true peace. Have you ever stopped to think how many times in life we choose illusion just to avoid facing the pain? And is it possible, even in old age, to reinvent ourselves and seek our dignity, even when the abandonment comes from those we least expect? Now, I want to hear from you. What is the greatest lesson life has ever taught you? Share it in the comments, because here, this space is ours to talk about pain, overcoming, love, and courage. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to receive more real and inspiring stories that show it's never too late to start over.